we begin with breaking news. 9 Chatham County deputies were fired today following an investigation into the death of an inmate.
Matthew Javadi was arrested on New Year's Eve while suffering a psychotic episode. He died sometime that night in the jail. Now, 2 of the deputies fired, Maxine Evans and Jason Kenny, had been on administrative leave for inappropriate conduct since that incident. The other deputies involved are Paul Folsom, Frederick Burke, Andrew Evans Martinez, Abram Burns, Deborah Johnson, Christopher Reed, and Eric Simpson. The sheriff's office also confirms 3 other deputies involved in this incident had already left the force for other reasons. 2 of them were fired.
Tonight, a WSAV Good Government Project investigation. For 6 months, News 3 had been digging into the deaths of 4 inmates in the Chatham County Jail in just the past year, including Matthew Javadi.
Well, this week, the Chatham County, on behalf of the sheriff and district attorney, is taking WSAV to court, asking a judge to rule that we have no right to the jailhouse video and other documents related to Javadi's death. Well, WSAV believes the release is not only in the public interest, it's the law. News 3's Dave Cartoonan has been on this story since the very beginning.
District Attorney Meg Heap and Sheriff Al St. Lawrence contend they are not required to release the video of Matthew Javadi's death in the Chatham County Jail because it is part of a criminal investigation. The Georgia Open Records Act says, quote, public disclosure shall not be required for records that are records of law enforcement in any pending investigation. But the law then goes on to say this paragraph shall not apply to records in the possession of an agency that is the subject of the pending investigation, unquote. Both the GBI and the sheriff's own internal affairs unit investigated the jail in Javadi's death. Therefore, WSAV and its attorneys have argued that video of events leading up to Javadi's death must be produced under Georgia law. However important, this is only a part of WSAV's efforts over the past 6 months to obtain documents and video related to the 4 inmate deaths. In November, we asked for communications between the jail and its healthcare provider, Corizon. The law requires a response in 3 days. They took 56, and then only to deny our entire request, but not before forwarding a message from Sheriff's Major Russell Smith, which claims, quote, the email system is not backed up individually, unquote. The Georgia Records Act requires a clear retention policy of public documents. Then, when WSAV requested this video, which shows the transport of inmate Donald Johnson, who also died in custody, we were initially denied again, told this video was also part of an investigation, even though that investigation had concluded 9 days earlier.
Yeah, I just need to go to the hospital.
We also showed you the gut-wrenching jailhouse video of Matthew Laughlin pleading to be taken to the hospital before his death in custody of congestive heart failure last April. When Chatham County produced that video, we expected 2 other jail visits even closer in time to Laughlin's death. But those 2 video files were corrupted. The county has provided no explanation. Meantime, that young man's family has sued Chatham County over their own requests for records they say the county has not provided them. When it was time for Sheriff St. Lawrence to be deposed in that case, he was a no-show. And when we confronted the sheriff's attorney, Chatham County Attorney Jonathan Hart,
I think my question is pretty simple. You haven't returned my phone calls or my emails, and you didn't show up to a deposition yesterday.
And yet, just Thursday, the lawyers for Laughlin's family finally received more than 500 emails they had requested. Those emails were provided to WSAV Friday, months after we were told they could not be recovered.
Friday was another day the Chatham County Attorney's Office had set as a deadline for themselves to produce some of the records we've requested over the past 6 months. If they do produce more information, we'll look through it and let you know what we find. I'm Dave Cartoonan, WSAV News 3.
In a response, the district attorney says, quote, the accused should not be tried in the media by the voice of public opinion. And Chatham County's attorney says that WSAV and News 3, quote, disagree about what documents are exempt from production due to the ongoing criminal investigation. Well, you can read more by going to WSAV.com and look at the news tab for the Good Government Project.
Our top story tonight, as a grand jury prepares to hear the case of a man dying in the hands of authorities, we have another News 3 exclusive investigation.
After months-long legal struggle with the Chatham County Attorney's Office, WSAV News 3 has obtained the first written account from inside the Chatham County Jail about the death of Matthew Javadi back in January.
News 3's Dave Cartoonan has the documents and reconstructs the timeline.
It appears as an entry in the Chatham County Detention Center's Watch Commander's log for January 2nd, entered 18 minutes after midnight. Quote, 1078 called at 2355 hours in R&D. 1078 is the jail code for distress call. 2355 means the call went out a few minutes before midnight, January 1st, from receiving and discharge. The account continues. Inmate Javadi, Matthew, became combative while being processed. Sergeant Rowland drive-stunned the inmate to gain compliance. That is Sergeant Anza Rowland, who is not one of the 12 deputies the Sheriff's Office has confirmed were part of the Javadi encounter. Drive-stun is a term describing the use of a taser on a person. And then, he, Javadi, grabbed the taser from her and a struggle ensued. He drive-stunned her, Private Capers, and Private Vincent. He also struck Sergeant Rowland in the face with the taser and backwards to the floor. She was transported to Memorial Medical Center via ambulance. Privates Capers and Vincent, two of the deputies since fired. Vincent, one of the 9 fired Friday for his still unexplained involvement. Capers fired for this use of unnecessary force on another inmate 3 weeks after Javadi's death. Then, inmate was secured in the restraint chair with a spit mask. Nurse Brown checked and approved restraints. All paged, sent out, and reports to be filed. The entry ends with no explanation of how Javadi died, nor does it say when or who found him dead. Only a distress call at 11:55 p.m. January 1st. Whether the distress call was over the violent encounter or the discovery of Javadi's body is not clear. And then there's the placement of this distress call inside the Watch Commander's log. 10 other entries about events seemingly after the distress call appear in the log before the distress call entry, including notifying the jail's administration and internal affairs, injury reports on the deputies involved, and both the arrival and the departure of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Savannah Chatham Metro Police's report says their officers responded to Javadi's apparent psychotic episode at 6:15 the night before. And the log says GBI arrived at 5:45 the next morning, leaving a nearly 12-hour window with a flurry of activity in between, but with still no details on what happened after Matthew Javadi purportedly grabbed Anza Rowland's taser.
Now, initially, all of our requests for information in the Javadi death were denied by the Chatham County Attorney's Office. It took WSAV's attorneys demanding initial incident reports and logs like this one, which can never be withheld under the Georgia Open Records Act. That demand resulted in the sheriff and the district attorney taking WSAV to court for a declaratory judgment for more records in the Javadi death. Records we believe cannot legally be withheld from the public. And we will keep you updated. I'm Dave Cartoonan, WSAV News 3.
We asked the Sheriff's Office about how jail logs are kept. They responded through the County Attorney's Office that Georgia's open records law does not require them to answer our questions and only confirmed the police code for a distress call. All of our remaining questions about Sheriff's Office procedure were referred to the Chatham County District Attorney and remain unanswered.
Well, also tonight, new information into the investigation into Matthew Javadi's death that's only available because of WSAV's legal efforts to release public documents in the death at the jail.
Well, last night we showed you how our legal efforts uncovered that Matthew Javadi was tased several times, then left for, quote, a couple of hours. Tonight, more from our deposition of the sheriff's chief deputy and the incomplete picture painted in the wake of Javadi's death. News 3's Dave Cartoonan's been on the story for months.
In a deposition taken by WSAV's attorneys last week, Chatham County Chief Deputy Sheriff Roy Harris, delegated by the Sheriff Al St. Lawrence, makes some troubling admissions about the state of records inside the Sheriff's Office, generally, and in the death of Matthew Javadi in January specifically. For months, WSAV News 3 has fought for the release of public documents in the possession of the sheriff. The Georgia Open Records Act says records in investigations and prosecutions can be withheld, but that this, quote, shall not apply to records in the possession of an agency that is the subject of the pending investigation or prosecution, unquote. And yet, Chief Deputy Roy Harris testified the Sheriff's Office has not released internal affairs investigations and jailhouse videos in the Ajibade death on, quote, advice of counsel and the fact that the district attorney requested the information be withheld until such time that she could prosecute, unquote.
The district attorney joined the sheriff last month to take WSAV to court over the records, and arguments will be heard in that case in Superior Court next week. Now, District Attorney Meg Heap contends that the records should not be released because the case should not be tried in the media. Well, WSAV's counsel disagrees, and in his testimony, Roy Harris confirms that another organization, the GBI, was the one that conducted the criminal investigation.
Internal affairs investigations are separate from criminal investigations in that they are looking for policy violations or anything that we had done wrong in our handling of the situation, unquote. Later, WSAV attorney Sadie Craig, quote, is it your understanding that the primary concern with release of the video is to limit public discussion of the video before the case is prosecuted? Harris, quote, yes. Harris is also forced to admit under oath the Sheriff's Office has no email retention policy, a potential violation of the Georgia Records Act, despite the recommendations of a consulting firm to do so more than a year ago. And specifically, with the few records the Sheriff's Office has released in Ajibade's death, Harris admits the watch commander's log entry on Ajibade's violent encounter was revised more than 22 hours after its initial entry. Harris, quote, and I'll tell you this is a system that really was not designed for this. That's why we were having problems, unquote. Ajibade family attorney Will Claiborne, we don't know what edit was made after 2,200 hours on January 2nd, do we? Harris, quote, no, but we have researched that diligently, unquote. But perhaps most troubling of all in the events around Matthew Ajibade's death in the jail, Harris acknowledges the Sheriff's Office has released information focused only on Ajibade's violent actions in the altercation. Claiborne, quote, is it accurate to say that all of the information that's been released by the Sheriff's Department, as we sit here right now, would indicate that Matthew Ajibade had been violent, but that no one had been violent toward him? Harris, quote, I suppose so. I'm not sure. Later, Claiborne asks, quote, but the answer to my question, though, is that yes, that creates an inaccurate picture of what occurred. Harris, quote, probably.
I'm Dave Cartoonan, WSAV News 3.
The Sheriff's Office provided an update for us this afternoon. They've resolved software and policy issues with their logs going forward, but still have not adopted an email retention policy. To see or not to see? That's the question before a Chatham County Superior Court judge in connection with the death of Matthew Ajibade.
WSAV was in court today squaring off against the Sheriff's Office and the district attorney over records and video from the night he died in the Chatham County Detention Center. In January, the 21-year-old SCAD student was found dead after being arrested and taken to the jail. The young man was tased several times, according to officials, and later found dead. An autopsy said he died of blunt force trauma. Three
people are charged with involuntary manslaughter in his death, two of them former Chatham County deputies. And after months of requests for additional information and video, it's now up to a judge.
News 3's Joanne Merrigan was in court today. Joanne?
That's right, Kim. Results of an internal affairs investigation as well as jailhouse video were the two main issues argued today. But attorneys for the Ajibade family also joined in the arguments, saying the family wants more information. All this while the DA says this information is now part of a criminal investigation that needs to go forward.
A prosecution is going forward. Therefore, the information contained related to that prosecution is not subject to the Open Records Act yet.
An attorney for District Attorney Meg Heap saying release of additional information and video should not be made now before those charged are prosecuted in Ajibade's death.
This information will come out eventually. It's just not now that it comes out because of that actual pending indictment.
The point he says is it's better to have it come out after trial.
Silencing public dissent is not a proper reason to close records.
But Sadie Craig, an attorney representing Media General and WSAV, says the information is needed now.
It's a matter of public concern because these are public officials who are charged with the responsibility for taking care of the inmates, and they haven't been able to do so, at least in the case of Mr. Ajibade.
Media attorneys argued the sheriff's office was the subject of a criminal investigation and because of that had no right to refuse making the reports and video public. An attorney for the Ajibade family agreed.
Essentially, the Sheriff's Department is urging this court here today to say that records that are normally provided in the open records context are now shielded because they fouled up so badly.
Will Claiborne says the Ajibade family knows practically nothing about what happened to their loved one that night and does have the right to at least as much information or more than the media may be able to obtain.
Every day, there are citizens of this community who are in the jail. Do their procedures need to be changed? Do they need to be changed in regard to the use of tasers? Citizens are not going to know unless this type of information is made public. That's the whole purpose of the Open Records Act, is so citizens can have confidence in the operation of their government. And when you have a young man who is in jail for 2 days and turns up dead, it raises a lot of questions.
Well, the judge did not make a ruling today, but one is expected shortly. Attorney Claiborne is also asking that Meg Heap be kicked off this case, and in turn, she's asking for a gag order to keep him and another family attorney from talking so much to the press. Joanne Merrigan, WSAV News 3.
Ferguson, Cincinnati, North Charleston.
3 of many cities in which the government's own video provides critical evidence of when law enforcement should and should not be charged with criminal acts. Publicly released government video has changed what you know and when you know it, but not always and not everywhere. Here in Chatham County, officials refuse to release video and documents related to the death of an inmate more than 8 months ago. And as Dave Cartoonan reports, a new case just 4 hours up the road in Athens draws another stark contrast with Chatham County.
Will you not talk to me for like 2 seconds? Turn around, put your hands behind your back.
Police body camera video that rocked the Athens Clark Police Department. June 13th, Officer Jonathan Frazier confronts an intoxicated Michael Roquet at a local hotel. Roquet had been ordered off the property, but then gets angry when Officer Frazier puts his hands on him.
Turn around, you're under arrest. I'm trying to talk to you, you're gonna hit me. Stop! You're under arrest.
Which leads to a confrontation even more violent.
Bro, what are you trying to do? Get off, dude. What are you doing?
That's the sound of Frazier's baton hitting Roquet repeatedly. 9 baton strikes in all. In 4 days, Frazier would be placed on administrative leave. In less than 3 weeks, he would be fired. And a month after that, August 3rd, an arrest warrant was issued for Frazier for aggravated assault.
Our officers are taught to de-escalate, and if you can't de-escalate, then use the minimum amount of force necessary to control the situation. And in my opinion, Officer Frazier at that time went beyond that.
Frazier now awaits criminal trial, just like the 2 Chatham County Sheriff's deputies who pleaded not guilty and await trial in the death of Matthew Ajibade at the Chatham County Jail. But that's where the similarities end. 8 months on, the Chatham County Sheriff and District Attorney still have not released a comprehensive account, just a news release and heavily revised jail logs in the death of Matthew Ajibade at the Chatham County Jail. WSAV has repeatedly requested documents in the case under the Georgia Open Records Act, which stipulates records of an agency under investigation are not exempt from release. In response, the DA and sheriff sued WSAV, asking a judge to suppress jailhouse video and internal affairs reports from public disclosure. A judge complied, and the case is now headed to the Georgia Court of Appeals. The DA's office also successfully pursued a gag order against the Ajibade family attorney and sought to gag former Deputy Maxine Evans' defense attorney. They entered an order to prevent defense attorneys from speaking about the evidence handed over to them. And they never notified Ajibade's family of a death certificate, then sent an investigator to the health department to find out how his family got it. Prosecutor Christy Barker then announced a different cause of death in Superior Court. But by contrast, WSAV requested Officer Frazier's body camera video from the Athens Clark Police Department, which had already been produced to other media outlets. In 2 business days, the department sent by mail the body camera video, the incident report from June, photographs of Michael Roquet's injuries, the internal affairs investigation, police radio recordings and interviews, and Officer Frazier's personnel file. All produced under the same open records law Chatham County has used to shield records in the Ajibade death from the public. The only thing in the Athens-Clark list that Chatham County handed over were the personnel files, but those had been scrubbed of any disciplinary action taken against the deputies in the death of Ajibade. And yet in both cases, all of these materials will almost certainly be used in criminal prosecutions against the officers. Athens-Clark's assistant chief explained his department's rationale.
Our officers were eager to get body cameras, every one of them, when we started deploying them. I think this just makes it easier for us to be transparent. I think society is going to expect that.
District Attorney Meg Heap said she would not comment on the Athens case because it is in another judicial circuit. And in the Ajibade case, referred us to the court order WSAV has now taken to the Georgia Court of Appeals.
I'm Dave Cartoonan, WSAV News 3.
Dave also reports this is all in sharp contrast to the handling of the Charles Smith case, an officer-involved shooting in which surveillance video of Smith's arrest was publicly released within days of his death from police gunfire. In that same case, the district attorney also employed a seldom-used two-step grand jury process, she said, to enhance public transparency. Yet important video and records in the New Year's Day death of Matthew Ajibade remain hidden from public view. Dave has been digging deeply into the case of Matthew Ajibade for nearly 8 months. Get all the facts by going to WSAV Investigates under the News tab on the homepage of WSAV.com.